Hello, everyone. It is November 2nd. This is sig-aws, our biweekly meeting. We have a fairly light agenda today, so do please add things to the agenda if you would like to discuss them. Also have your name, just so we know who you are for future for posterity. Otherwise, I suggest we can jump right into the agenda. I rearranged it a little bit. So first up on the agenda is error developer Ilya and Nishi. Do you want to discuss EKS Cuddle as a subproject?
I think Ilya brought this topic up, and I wanted to give some context. Earlier, when I started building the sig-aws charter, I was advised that I should not try to add tools into the charter that are specific to a platform or specific product like EKS. And we also had a discussion about adding COPS as a subproject. But there is interest from multiple users to make EKS Cuddle a subproject. And also, Ilya was interested in thinking about this. So I just wanted to have an open conversation about it, see what people think, and go from there. Ilya, am I saying it right? Do you want to add some context to it? Please feel
free. Yeah. Just a little bit from like our perspective. We never really wanted to like own this as a tool. It's more of a community project from our perspective, really. I'm the only person from eWorks who's working on it. I'd like to continue working on it, but it seems more natural for the project to have a more neutral home, and from the perspective of the active contributors also.
So yeah, I wanted to see if we can talk about this. I don't know what users think. Justin, what are your thoughts? Could we like discuss it or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have less of a problem with it than I guess other people. Sounds like other people had. I see the objection, right? Which is, let's assume EKS Cuddle. I don't know the full scope of EKS Cuddle, and you can explain it to me if this is incorrect, because it might help. But let's assume EKS Cuddle only works with EKS, which is a closed source Kubernetes orchestration platform, just like GKE is a closed source Kubernetes orchestration platform. They're both based around open source Kubernetes, but they are not like usable fully open source. I think that's fair to say. Like, should that belong in the community? And I guess we have a lot of things that work with proprietary platforms like AWS ALB controller, right? The source code for that is not open source. Just like we have the GCE ALB controller, and like Google Cloud Platform, Google Compute Engine is itself not open source, right? So we definitely talk to things that are closed source. I don't know. And I guess the other point would be, we don't have another place, as far as I know, to put this as a community project other than as a Kubernetes SIG repo. The other place we could do it is as an affiliated repo. I think that's what it's called, or associated repo. But I tried to do that, and it was not. It's not a reality. Apparently no one has done it, because it is not possible to set it up right now.
Okay, so one would have to pioneer the process.
I started like hacking through the weeds, and I can share with you where I got to, which is basically you have to set up the CLA bot, and you can't set up the CLA bot today without. You just can't set it up. There's all sorts of stuff that has to happen that, I don't know, maybe the procedure is better now. And it felt a little sad that it was just the CLA bot, but I suggest that we ask, let's assume that there's no objection at the sort of project level. Like, do we like it as a sig-aws project? Like, can we get consensus that if there's no philosophical objections, would we take it as a sig-aws project? And then we could post something to steering or something saying, look, we have this project, we like it in sig-aws, we got it approved conditional. Oh, did I freeze? We got it approved conditionally, but we wanted to do a sanity check on whether it's appropriate to have it be a sig-aws project or yeah. So I guess over to everyone is like, do people feel comfortable with it being a sig-aws project, other than the question of like that it integrates with a closed source thing, just like if it were like GKE cuddle would have the same objection. So other than that objection, tabling that objection, how do people feel about it?
Yeah, with just a few things to add in contrast with the GKE tools. They're part of the Google Cloud SDK, which is a broader project which has historical reasons to exist on its own, the way that it does, right? So yeah, and I mean, I think from the sort of philosophical perspective, it'd be nice if one day there was some kind of a universal substrate for CLIs for creating clusters in any of the hosted providers, and for that being a community project seems like a no-brainer idea. So in spirit of that, what do people think really? Because EKS Kettle is currently a standalone CLI, just because there isn't like a central place for a CLI to realize itself within the community or as a kind of part of a wider project, right? There is Cluster Cuddle, but it's still early days for Cluster Cuddle, and it's a question of whether Cluster Cuddle sticks around for any longer. I mean, it's unclear what's the story there.
So Jason and Mike are making some comments. Can I ask you both to just speak up? Jason, you said that in the community meeting this came up?
Yeah, sorry. It was related to the comment about automating video uploads for the SIG meeting.
Oh, okay.
That's the reason why I didn't bring it up in the meeting.
Oh, okay.
Because,
I did have concerns with that. I wanted to like find a video of a SIG call like 2 weeks after it happened, and I couldn't find it.
I am a bad person, but let's table that issue.
It wasn't this SIG. It was a different SIG, whatever.
Okay,
let's focus on EKS Cuddle for now.
Let's focus on EKS Cuddle. Okay. I'm trying to see what Mike is saying. I'm not familiar with kubectl EKS, but shouldn't the EKS part be a plugin type thing and leave it in AWS repo? Same for others similar.
Well, in some world where those type of plugins may be a thing, it could become a thing. But at the moment, it's in a slightly different domain, right? It's more like a version of for from CLI perspective, from like the end user's perspective, and I mean, EKS Cuddle obviously does try to mimic some of the COPS flags and such things wherever it made sense. So I mean, we kind of made it easier for people to kind of mentally migrate, at least not like one-to-one, but some of the flags named very much the same.
It's actually a good, I think it does raise a good point. We do have kubectl plugins now, and it is very reasonable that like maybe GKE cloud, maybe G-Cloud, the GKE tooling might move to a kubectl plugin, right? And in the same way, you might support this through a kubectl plugin as well. And where would we in future want those to live? Would we want them to live? So from that point of view, like I very much, my personal view is we should, on the community like health issue, is it's better to have it in a community on repo and have it managed through the SIG structure. That's the structure we have, and I think it's a good thing for the SIG to accept. And so I think I am in favor. I do think, given that people had objections, we should run it by steering or whatever the appropriate form is. But if people are generally, what we've done before is, if people are generally in favor of the idea of bringing in as a repository, maybe with some reservations around the philosophy issues, then we should proceed in our SIG and then raise that issue separately. So what we've done in the past is a straw poll of anyone that objects. So I don't know if anyone has any particular objections to the idea of bringing EKS Cuddle into a SIG repository under SIG AWS.
Why don't we get all the plus ones?
Okay, we can do that. Yes.
So, okay, right. Seems unanimous.
Seems pretty overwhelming, yes. So, I mean, I think we've done a one-pager in the past, which is primarily just to be like, this is going to be the name of the repo. these are going to be the owners, and just sort of like giving people a quick summary. And if we send that to sig-aws and to the sig-aws mailing list, and I guess to
we do a PR as well, right, Justin? We do the voting on sig-aws Google Groups. Ilya, I can give you the Google Doc format where you can fill in the description of the project, and then we open a PR, and then we can send that out to the steering committee for comment.
Yeah, and I think Nishi, you've seen. We should make it clear when we open the PR that we are doing this and are going to send it to the steering committee, because otherwise someone will immediately forward it to the steering committee.
I'll help you with the wording and everything on it.
Cool. Thank you. All right.
But yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome.
That's wonderful. So I have why don't I bring up the issue now, the next thing on the agenda, and then we can discuss the ordering of whether we want to talk about it, which is just SIG Cloud Provider, which is a different SIG that is responsible for overarching cloud provider stuff, or things that integrate with cloud provider, in the same way that SIG Network is responsible for things that deal with networking. They are a SIG. They've primarily been looking at extraction of the cloud provider code from Kubernetes into a new component, which is going to be called the Cloud Controller Manager. But there has also been a suggestion that we fold all the existing individual cloud SIGs, SIG GCP, SIG AWS, SIG OpenStack, SIG vSphere, I think SIG IBM Cloud. I'm probably forgetting some people, but all the individual cloud SIGs essentially under SIG Cloud Provider. There is some debate about whether we don't have a concept of sub-SIGs today, so they can't really be sub-SIGs unless we change things there. But we could certainly like carry on the sub-projects, and I brought up the idea that we have a sort of user group type of thing going on here as well, which I think we would want to keep. So some sort of meeting of like dedicated to AWS, or primarily focused for AWS users. But I don't know how other people feel about that idea. Primarily, this discussion is happening in SIG Cloud Provider, but I think it will escalate to others, like to SIG architecture or SIG steering fairly soon. But yeah, I don't know if we have any views on this from this.
So Justin, I brought this up earlier with Andrew and Caleb in SIG Cloud Provider, probably 3 months back, where I expressed my opinion that we should have I'm not opposed to having sig-aws fold in, but it should be a sub SIG, which has its own freedom and governance structure, primarily because we're lacking everywhere in testing, in documentation, in roadmap features. And while the OpenStack team has decided that beyond Cloud Controller Manager, whatever extra tooling they build, all of that will sit under SIG Cloud Provider. So there's Cinder integration, Manila integration, Keystone, everything sits in SIG Cloud Provider. SIG Cloud Provider's binary is primarily the Cloud Controller Manager. And so we have many other binaries that we are releasing. This is going to be our first alpha release in Kubernetes. I still want the idea of, at least this is my opinion, a sub-SIG, which gives us the independence, but then pushes through the end-to-end testing standards, the documentation standards, and the external CCM that we are already working on. An alpha release, Mike is working on it. I think that's what should happen. And that does require a discussion in SIG architecture or SIG steering, because they've never done it before. But I think from your point about the user group and from my point that there are many things to fix for AWS, I just don't think folding everything into SIG Cloud Provider makes any sense. That's my view.
I'm sorry. I like the idea of, yep, I'm off the train now. I like the idea of the sub-SIG because I would like to see more interaction between the cloud provider stuff up in the controller manager area with the SIG, but I do also think that SIG AWS has a lot of value being separate from that set of code.
I'm inclined to agree. I would say one, the gotcha is that the sub-sig concept does not exist and probably doesn't, as far as I can tell, one of the primary objections is around the number of SIGs that exist. And I don't know if having a tree of SIGs would actually address the number, like whether they're counting, how they're counting the number of SIGs. So I wanted to make sure that we got the viewpoints of this SIG. I think, I personally think it's probably risky to do right now, so we should proceed carefully, but I think we can certainly have more of a formalized reporting structure, or not formalized, we can like try to report up and down, like what's happening in SIG Cloud Provider and into this group, and what is, we can report up into SIG Cloud Provider what is happening in SIG AWS. I guess that would be, we can sort of start doing that, act as if we have the new structure before we like rock the boat too much.
Just like sort of generally, somewhat philosophically, isn't there a natural sort of overlap between most of the SIGs in some way, and at the same time, they kind of execute in somewhat in parallel, right? Some people are the same on some SIGs, and I mean, some people are members of multiple SIGs, etc. And it's kind of natural to not have a nested structure, more like overlapping sets, really.
I think that's true on a lot of the projects. I think, like, I'd say it's not true on EKS cutoff, for example, but it is true on, for example, the encryption provider, right? Like, why is the GKE encryption provider different from the GCE encryption provider different from the AWS encryption provider? And if Azure has a similar thing, I think some of the stuff that Seth did when he was implementing the AWS one is probably brought up some interesting ideas that we should definitely loop back into the GCP encryption provider, the Google Cloud encryption provider. And so, like, from that point of view, there are definitely projects where it would be better to have like different structures. It may be that we make a decision as we go, right? I think the idea of having an overarching SIG that helps people collaborate is a great one. And I guess the question is whether we should like change the structure first.
So is there anything that would prevent the definition of such a substructure within the current limitations of the SIG charter right now? Obviously, you'd have to create a new SIG charter, but that might be a way to kind of formalize that structure with the sub-project ownerships for each of the subgroups kind of aligning, with the right membership. And I think that might be a way to address kind of some of those concerns.
There is some tooling dependency. Sorry, someone else was speaking. I don't want to.
Oh, that was me. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay. I do know that there is some tooling dependency in Kubernetes org and community, and how SIG YAMLs is structured, because today the hierarchy is one SIG and sub-projects underneath it. So I expect things to break if we try to have a one SIG and sub-SIG. So there will be some tooling changes, at least in the beginning. And then I think from a governance standpoint, the steering committee and architecture will have to agree. So all that will, and I think another important point why this is really being initiated is because there is an interest to reduce the number of SIGs, and that's why they're doing it. So yeah, this needs to be discussed. I just think that SIG AWS is so big. There are so many users. I get the point about democracy and opening the forum for all cloud providers, but it's impossible to collapse AWS in my view. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
I put in the chat, I was just thinking that maybe what we do is like an early SIG meeting where it's including both those SIGs. And so that way there's that closer collaboration between both until we get that all figured out.
I wasn't sure it was my connection or I don't know if other people heard that correctly, but I did not really hear that. It seems like it was a bad connection there, Mike.
Sorry, yeah. I'll just put it in the chat.
Okay. And we would still, I think, I got some of it, and we would still be able to have dedicated meetings under the SIG. To an extent, it's like inside baseball, I think, like whether you're a SIG or not. But so I don't want to like spend too much time on this, and we should probably like stop, and we have other things on the agenda now. But we could still have, I think, the same, like COPS has office hours, for example, but COPS is I think it's technically a project under SIG cluster lifecycle, but you know, we have in the other AWS meets every 2 weeks, and in the other, this time slot every other week, we spend an hour talking about like COPS, and it's sort of like a user group and developer discussion. So like we could still have that, and COPS is not a SIG, so we can still have meetings, for example, but it's mostly about governance and structure. Unless anyone else has anything to add, I suggest we carry on the agenda. The discussion is also happening in SIG Cloud Provider. If anyone from this group is interested in Kubernetes-wide cloud things, SIG Cloud Provider is great. They're mostly working on the Cloud Controller Manager right now. But yes, I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of the discussion. And thank you for the here. Yes, I like the idea, Mike. That's a good idea. So Mike says, one where this, is it possible to have a quarterly or whatever SIG where it includes both SIG Cloud Provider and SIG AWS having a joint meeting to promote that cooperation and collaboration, which I think is a great idea. I think, you know, those sort of things which are not massive structural changes, but like let us dip our toe in the water and see how it goes, I think might be a great idea.
So the other context to add there, Mike, is AWS, at least me, Mike, and Justin are regularly involved in SIG Cloud Provider. We go to their regular meetings, and Mike Root, who's also on the call, is moving the out-of-tree CCM, and we're doing the alpha in Kubernetes 1.13. There's also a lot of interface dependencies for the CCM in core Kubernetes, and OpenStack, Google, AWS, all three of us are working on one PR that's moving those dependencies into Kubernetes staging right now. So actually we have a ton of collaboration around that cloud controller manager concept. So if you join the SIG Cloud Provider meeting every Wednesday, you'll see that we're working together. Plus we are also, we did a documentation kept together, and now we're working on how to standardize E2E testing for CCM. So you'll see that it's already happening. I just wanted to give you that context.
I propose we move on unless anyone else wants to add anything. But the next item on the agenda is NLB bugs and features. Nishi, it looks like you've highlighted 3 issues that I guess we should prioritize to make sure they get into 1.13.
I just need these bugs to be fixed. We don't have the cycles to do beta for NLB in 1.13, so we'll do it in 1.14. But I would love for someone to look at these bugs, especially you, Justin. Just prioritize these 3, and so we can move forward. And then there are a couple of features we're working on, and E2E, but we can finish that by Q1, 1.14.
And it looks like some of these...
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, some of these looks like they might have fixes. At least the first one looks like there might be a fix available.
So reviews are required.
Got it. Okay, so it's just reviews. It's not help wanted on developing. Okay, I will definitely look at these then. Okay, I will happily look at these. Yeah, I think if there's anything else if there are any other high priority bugs, please do tag them with SIG AWS and tag me on them. I am working to keep up with the flood. Okay.
While we become approvers, you have to help us.
Absolutely, yes. Looks like the next item on the agenda is perhaps even more controversial than the previous sub-project issues. cluster API AWS as a sub-project. Nishi or Jason, do you want to?
Well, I think I remember Chris Nova proposing this, but I never completed the process to like make it happen. So I wanted to bring it up because Jason is doing all the work and we've not helped him at all. Hopefully that'll change going forward, but I just wanted to talk about it in the forum and see if there's an action item or what should we do, or does it belong to, say, cluster lifecycle?
Yeah, so I'd say it's probably not overly controversial, actually, Justin. Where the ownership sits really doesn't matter much to me. We just ended up creating it under SIG cluster lifecycle, mainly because it spawned out of the cluster API related work that we were doing. As it stands right now, we do have anybody that is in the SIG AWS leads group, which we synced a while back. It may need to be resynced, I'm not sure. But as approvers on the project by default as well, with the idea that the problem being is you can't actually have a sub-project that's owned by two different SIGs. So wherever it sits, as long as the right collaborators have access to it, it's great to me.
Do you want to just say, just for people that might not be fully aware, what cluster API AWS does and what it is for?
Yes, so it's actually cluster API provider AWS because we like to name things really long. But it's basically a provider implementation of the cluster API to be able to spin up clusters on AWS.
That's awesome. So this is the sort of next generation of tooling, of installation and management tooling should integrate with the cluster API, and there'll be plugins for GCP and AWS and OpenStack and DigitalOcean and all the clouds, but there will be a consistent Kubernetes API on top of those. I think it feels as core as the cloud provider code in future. I think if it didn't have a home, SIG AWS would definitely be the home for it. If there's some additional we support this project, but even if we don't own it type thing, and should SIG cluster lifecycle ever disown it, we will happily own it type thing, we should declare that. But if it has a home today, then I think that's fine. I don't know if there's anything we could do further, Nishi.
Oh no, I just put it up on the agenda because I know Chris Nova brought it up and she wanted me to follow up and close this thread. So I want to know, do I need to make it a sub-project or does it belong to cluster lifecycle? Jason, you have to be less diplomatic. Give me a yay or nay.
Well, I mean, really, I consider it a collaboration between the two SIGs because, it is related to cluster API and it tracks that project very closely. But we also want people from this SIG highly involved as well so that we're implementing kind of best practices as we build out these clusters. We're targeting the right users, and that's very much more related to SIG AWS rather than SIG cluster lifecycle. But at the end of the day, who actually owns it versus making sure that we have the right access, that's going to be the real challenge. Ideally there would be, some structure for, two SIGs, co-owning a project to kind of ease this type of burden, but similar to the SIG cloud provider thing, we're limited with the current structure that we have.
Okay, so we just leave it in cluster lifecycle for now. Justin, you're okay with that?
I'm fine with that. I think it's actually an interesting pattern that when they start up, all these sort of projects are more likely to be, most of the work will be SIG cluster lifecycle cluster API things, but you can imagine that a year down the road, most of it will be oh, there's a new AWS way of launching instances or whatever it is that you guys have coming, right? And so more of the work in future will be more AWS-y and less generic. So I don't know if that's a pattern. It feels like that's a pattern that we'll see, but yeah, so, I'm happy to leave it as it is.
So today, it's the who owns the repo currently sits by who are the current contributors towards the sub project right now. So the VMware provider sits under the VMware related SIG. But because most of the contributors have been under SIG cluster lifecycle for the AWS provider so far, GCP and OpenStack, that's kind of why they fell under SIG cluster lifecycle. But where it ends up, as long as we continue working together to kind of build this thing out, it doesn't really matter much to me.
So I think we can leave it. I think we could start a list if you wanted to of projects we would underwrite. So if they lost their sponsorship by SIG cluster lifecycle, we would immediately snap them up. But as long as they're not free agents, we can leave them where they are, I think. Next item on the agenda is from Kay Cool.
Yeah.
Offline COPS deployment into AWS GovCloud.
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me?
Oh, Cooper. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Cooper. So I'm trying to use COPS in GovCloud because there is no EKS. So I have to dig through all of the calls out to the internet, like for NodeUp and I'm not sure whatever else, but there's about 8 things that I've identified as Docker images that it pulls down, and then a few binaries. So I've just tried. I couldn't find that within just the COPS. The COPS itself. So I dumped it into a Terraform plan, and I went through all of that to see how it's actually building out the machines. And so what I'm doing is just replacing those calls to the World Wide Web to my local Nexus repo. And so that's, I don't know if there's any effort or structure to go for AWS GovCloud as a provider, because that would be really great. And also, I'm not sure if this is the right forum for me to be here. Is it office hours?
Yeah, you're always, everyone's always very welcome. I would say yes. This is,
okay.
So we alternate between SIG AWS, which sort of tries to do like AWS type things, and in the other weeks are COPS office hours, where we talk more about COPS.
Right.
There are obvious, like this is a general problem, but the specific, it seems like you're talking about specifics for COPS.
Right.
I will briefly say that, we have some work that I think is like 80% of the way there in terms of the 80-20 rule, in terms of allowing offline installation.
Okay, cool.
And perhaps if you opened an issue on COPS, then we can like go through, but I will also try to, I don't personally have access to GovCloud, which makes this difficult. I think I don't. And so we can sort of try to figure it out. But yes, there is some beginnings of support, and I think there's also support for using proxies, for example, if you're willing to use that.
Yes.
But that's
yeah, I've set my Nexus repo up as a proxy, so that was my second how I was going to go about it, instead of just going through line by line looking for things, looking at the internet. Just wanted to make sure that I was on the right page, and you had already done this before.
Yeah, there's not a magic flag. There's some work to set up a magic flag, but it's not there yet. And I know that like this is Amazon AWS has great support for like private S3 buckets, for example. So you can, in theory, set up a cluster which has no internet access at all. And
yes, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, the dream is to get a Kubernetes cluster to boot. I don't know if anyone has actually done that with their COPS or not.
Well, here we go.
Awesome. Well, yeah, definitely open an issue in COPS, and we can go from there. I think we're close enough in COPS that we might be able to get it to work, and then it'd be great for like Cluster API to have that sort of support, I think.
Okay.
And EKS, of course.
Yeah, it'd be great if that was there.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the EKS people and see if they're biting, but they're not moving. Okay.
Thank you.
I don't know if anyone else has. So yes, and do come along next week, and we can try to talk about it in more detail. But open an issue, and we can talk about it in the meantime.
Okay, will do.
Awesome. I don't know if anyone else. We've reached the end of our written agenda. I don't know if anyone else has any other items they would like to bring up. All right. Going once. Going twice. Looks like everyone gets back 22 minutes of their Fridays. Happy weekend, everybody.
Happy Friday. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.